Thanks, everyone. We are just now about to start our ISO 21434 update with the OEM partners, and Claudia Brast from Butzel Long will be here to introduce the panelists. They may want to speak a couple seconds about themselves, and then we'll get into the questions that they prepared for you all. Go ahead, Claudia. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome, everybody. It's a bright, sunny day here in Michigan. I hope you are all seeing the similar sunshine. We have a great panel this morning to kick off this discussion on the standards that we're dealing with right now with ISO 21434 and UNECE WP 29. The panelists are Lisa Boren from Ford. We have Anuja Sonelkar from Steer, Matt McKay from General Motors, and Bill Mazzara representing the ISO 21434 committee to talk about those standards. So folks, why don't you jump in and give a little more background on each of yourselves, and then we can start this discussion.
I guess I'll go ahead first. Again, my name is Lisa Boren, Vehicle Cybersecurity Manager at Ford Motor Company. Co-chair for the ISO SAE 21434 Cybersecurity Engineering Standard. Also the chair for the SAE J3061 Cybersecurity Best Practice that was issued as well. Participate in many different activities, Auto ISAC, Advisory Council on several things, SCAR and whatnot. But thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lisa. Matt?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. My name is Matt McKay. I'm a manager on the General Motors product cybersecurity team. My team, the title is Governance and Risk Analytics. We do a lot of activities that focus on incident response, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, governance and process, anomaly detection. I'm also similarly pretty involved in Auto ISAC, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Anuja.
Hi, I'm Anuja Sonelkar. I'm the CEO of Steer. We build autonomous vehicle technology, and our role in the automotive ecosystem is a supplier of technology. I have a background working with Patel and then Harman and now at Steer. I am also co-chair of the ISO 21434 standard and focused on product security, so secure product development, and also vice chair of SAE's Vehicle Electrical Cybersecurity Systems Committee. So I'm here today to talk predominantly about ISO 21434, how it applies, and how, as technology suppliers, we can work towards readiness and compliance.
Thank you, Anuja.
Thank you.
And Bill. I think, Bill, you're either still muted.
I'm muted.
There you go. Okay.
Mute buttons. All right. Yes. So I'm coming today as an individual. I'm a SAE member, a voting member of the joint working group that has published ISO SAE 21434. Please don't leave the SAE out. I also am the committee chair of the group that has published SAE J3101, which is a hardware cybersecurity standard. The hardware protected security environments in automotive, well, ground vehicle applications is actually the full title. And I've been in the industry for a long time. I like to say that I was originally part of OnStar way back in the day. Remember OnStar? We were making the first connecting vehicles for the first time, making the first authenticated connections, by the way. We weren't reckless. But as time went on, and that became apparent through several researchers that was the source of much of our consternation as it comes to cybersecurity. So I moved over from the connectivity side of the house to the cybersecurity side of the house, and I say that I am paying for my sins of the past to come in and help the industry make mitigations and correct the course. improve the way we connect our customers to
Yeah.
all of the services they want.
Thank you, Bill. Since you introduced us to a bit of the weeds with SAE and ISO, these standards, and we've talked about the precursors to 21434. How did we get to this point? One, and when will this standard be finalized? Two, and others that want to jump in, please do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit of what I said. I mean, this isn't a new subject. We've been connecting vehicles for decades. I mean, that was the 90s that I was working in connected vehicle. And so over the years, as the need for connectivity has grown, the threat of the internet has become more relevant to the auto industry. Cybersecurity isn't a feature of the car, it's an environment. Any connected feature must live in that environment, and we must contend with that environment. So ISO SAE 21434 is a joint working group between ISO and SAE. It is the first of its kind that the two organizations came together to collaboratively develop a standard to report what are the worldwide best practices for engineering in cybersecurity in the automotive space. A lot of people look at it and say, wow, it's new. Well, it's not new. This is a collection of many companies across many countries that have shared with how we do things presently and come to agreed upon terminology and communications so that we can express to the world how it is that we've been doing what we do. Yeah, when we're going to see it, maybe I'll let Lisa field that one as co-convener to the committee.
Okay, Lisa,
when
you're
are we
up.
going to see it, Lisa?
When are we going to see this?
So we're going to see this. It'll probably officially get released mid next year, so mid 2021. We'll be finishing up addressing all of the draft international standard ballot comments and finessing, I guess, the paper probably by the end of January, and then it takes another 5 months, unfortunately, because of the process before it'll finally get released, assuming that everything gets balloted and approved. So probably mid-year next year is when it'll be released. But yeah, like as Bill said, it's really to pave the path for more consistent cybersecurity engineering practices throughout the automotive industry.
So what do you see are the sort of
It is important
barriers?
to know that the draft is available to the public. You can download it and read it.
Correct. It has been released in February timeframe, so it's been available since then that you can purchase.
It's good afternoon reading, or
Yeah.
if you enjoy those things. So what do you see as the barriers ultimately to this implementation? How receptive do you think? And maybe Anuja, you can speak to that in terms of the non-OEM, more on the supplier side.
Sure. Maybe Lisa, I'll let you chime in first, and then I'll kind of pitch in with the non-OEM.
Yeah. So so this helps both the OEMs and the suppliers, like you said, make good cybersecurity engineering practices within the organization to make sure it's adhered to. I think that the standard essentially allows everyone to evaluate their products from a risk-based, I guess, technology or mindset is what I want to say. You have to do some auditing within your internal organization around your processes and practices. Also driving due diligence into your cybersecurity engineering disciplines that you have within your product development process as well that need to be met. That is what allows and ensures that due diligence was put into the design and development of the products that have been produced, whether they're from the OEM or from the parts supplier or even aftermarket.
And I'll just add here that, this standard has been developed keeping a lot of different things in mind, an entire life cycle. It's not just, it's looking at risk assessment, but also the engineering from a concept and product development to actually implementing, testing it. When it goes on road, it doesn't end there. There's continuous monitoring and development and even decommissioning. And then also looking at the cybersecurity culture of your organization and what it needs to be in order for you to stand up every single product line, every offering. Like Bill rightly put it, cybersecurity is not a thing. It is the thing that we are all immersed in. It's the environment. So anything and everything you're building needs to be subjected to security, and you have to be thinking from that mindset. So just like in automotive, in every new feature that's put into any vehicle, there is a business case behind it, and there's a product owner that says, this is what the market says, and they will pay this much for it, and therefore this product should be built, or this feature should be an add-on into this new model we're designing. Similarly, cybersecurity presents also a reverse business case. There is what happens if this product is not secure? What is the risk associated with putting a product out there that has not been vetted from a cybersecurity perspective? And that's why we start from a risk assessment perspective, that you can put a technical value against this product that you are putting into the vehicle. What happens when this is not secure to the point where what matches this asset class? And so there is a whole section where we help you walk through how you can do that as a supplier, as an OEM, as a tier one. And then you use that as the basis to define now what are the different aspects that need to go into building this product, how much of vulnerability testing needs to happen, how much resources you want to spend in securing this product, and in what dimension, and similarly what you will need to do to keep up once the vehicle is on the road. So it's a very comprehensive standard, and even if you're a supplier or a technology provider, there are guidelines later on how you can create compliance internally to your organization and be ready for and we can talk towards throughout this conversation we can bring various of those aspects in.
Right, thank you, Nusha. And Matt, what is your perspective in all this? And do you see that where is the driving force on this? Is it coming from the OEMs, I presume?
I think we could say it's an industry, it's a whole industry kind of, and it's a good, healthy pressure, because I really think all of the engineering discipline and the governance recommendations and the focus on the life cycle really applies to all the stakeholders in the connected vehicle ecosystem. So certainly within GM, we are aligning with 21434, as Bill mentioned. This isn't new, but this is a really good distillation of all of the risk assessment kind of best practices, and a real strong exclusive focus on cybersecurity engineering, which is very helpful in order to have that one document that you can refer people to, all the different stakeholders, even people on the policy side, to kind of have a good understanding of what it is that the automotive industry is focusing on with respect to cybersecurity. So I think it's really an equal focus for all the stakeholders, including third-party service vendors as well. We're seeing a lot of activity in the space where third-party vendors have latched on and recognized the importance of this document, and more importantly, have recognized that it's in everyone's best interest to align, to discuss the same language, to be able to frame risk in similar terms. So this is very helpful for all stakeholders in the connected vehicle ecosystem.
Well, you raise a good point, Matt, because here's the question. And if the standard is not yet final, and yet we all know it's coming, how do we ensure sort of consistent application across the whole automotive industry platform? And how do we assure that folks are, achieving that compliance? Where is that uniformity if the standard is not yet there?
Well, that was really some of the motivation make sure the draft was available to the public. Beyond the draft, we are doing committees, forums such as this. The SAE has presented training. Training is available. The point is even though the standard is not final, there is still a lot of consensus at this point that we are trying to get out and get the industry accustomed to prior to that final publication that is still yet months away.
Yeah, and I
I'd
would,
just like to add that like you said, the draft is already out there and made available to everybody so they can use that as the baseline. Certainly, I don't think it's going to drastically change when you get the final version. So I think that you can and should be able to use that as the baseline to start driving those practices into your organization today, to make sure that we're consistent. The terminology that's been consensus on is to help make sure that we can all talk the same language when we're talking to each other. So I think it's the baseline's already there in the draft, and the final will just have tweaks made to it.
You all would be quite amused over the small words we are spending hours arguing about at this point.
Yes.
The standard does that.
Yes.
it's
I'll just add that to the point where we have the draft out there. The draft is actually an excellent source for preparedness. There are sections in there that specifically talk to, see, OEMs have now, it's been almost a decade, have been focused on cybersecurity practices, some of the top tier ones also, but some of the smaller suppliers have not really joined on the bandwagon. So this draft is an excellent starting point. If you have not already, nothing is lost, you can still do it. There are continuous practices, vulnerability assessments. You can now build your track record, starting with other products you have in your portfolio. You can start doing vulnerability assessments and secure coding practices, start implementing them in there. Create and establish a track record for yourself as all the different assessments, and document them and what the summary of those are. Those you don't really need to do any much for planning. You can look at what you have and you can start there. So nothing is lost. It's still plenty of time to do the right things and be ready.
so is it the consensus of the group here that there's sort of uniform adoption and interest in implementing the standard, even though in its draft form, so that there's not going to be that barrier to getting this standard implemented? Is that the consensus I'm hearing?
I think so. From my standpoint, it won't be a hard sell to people to take it on. I mean, we have over 82 companies and 17 nations that are involved in consenting on what's in the standard. So it's quite a large activity of people who are involved in all spaces that acknowledge the need for this and have been participating to make sure it happens so that the whole industry can be doing it consistently. So I don't think that there's going to be this hard barrier of acceptance.
It's a bit of what we've been saying is that the industry has been doing cybersecurity in various forms for about a decade. And this standard is not inventing. A good standard should not invent. The standard is standardizing communication and terminology so that we all can communicate with each other more effectively. And so it's not a matter of introducing a new invention and a novel process for someone to adopt. It's a matter of changing some words and adapting terminology so that we all may communicate more easily with one another. It is something that it really isn't that the standard precedes the process. It's that the processes are in place amongst the 80 companies and I think it's 17 nations that have all contributed to the standard. And that's what comes out is that it is a matter of reporting to the world the commonality that exists between companies. And companies don't spend a lot of time comparing notes and saying, how do we all do the same thing together? That's what a standards body offers, is to make that forum for us to come forward and speak to what are the best practices that we all do follow already.
Yeah, thank you. And I would point out too that Geneva is going to be releasing its kind of discussion on 21434 here shortly, and that will be a useful program that folks can use as reference. That security team has been working on that and looking at the standard for some time. So that's coming out there. Let's move in the parallel universe that we're talking to in terms of cybersecurity standards to the UNECE world going on in the EU and the UN and that. Does anybody want to step up and describe what's going on in that parallel universe over there with UNECE?
I can go ahead and say something. So the UNECE, they have two new regulations that have been issued. One is around cybersecurity and one is around software update. They're in the same time frame that's required. And they both require a cybersecurity management system for the cybersecurity side or a software update management system for the software update side that has to be certified. And then before you can sell the vehicles in those markets, you have to then get also whole vehicle type approval as well. So there's two aspects of those regulations, the certification and then the approval. So I know that they use or they reference our standard, the ISO SAE 21434 standard, as helping meet that cybersecurity management system requirements that are required as part of that cybersecurity regulation. So it is a big proponent to help you ensure that you're driving the cybersecurity practices within your company and collecting that evidence, as Anuja was very much mentioning, that collection of evidence, so that you can then, when and if you're audited because of the regulation, you can now show proof of why your parts are secure and enough to go to production.
Yeah, and Lisa, you raised a good point, because accountability, it seems to be a really important part. And I know when General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, that sort of back office accountability, being able to document everything is really important. And 21434 has a very precise documentation standard there. And the UNECE, that's going to be effective in January 2021, right?
Yeah, that's when the regulation is official, but it doesn't have to be brought into production until July 2022 is the first launch, or July 2024 is the all registrations by that point. So we have some time, but it's quickly coming around the corner.
Yeah. Yes, time is moving quickly for all of us, I think.
Yes.
So back into the overview a bit, and everybody has been saying that the 21434 draft is out there, and that folks are really incorporating that already into design, production, engineering, and so forth. What is the method and how that is being done? Is that from the top down? Are the engineers doing this? Is this a matter of administrative saying, okay, here's the draft, you do this? How is that being done in this informal, voluntary way? How do engineers really get a hold of this?
I can't speak for the rest of the industry. I can just speak to Ford because I'm within Ford. But obviously, because I've led the development, I know exactly what's in there. So I'm the one who's within our organization driving the processes that need to be met in order to be compliant with the standard, as well as following with what needs to be met as part of the regulations. So I think that almost as a whole industry, I think the executives top of all the organizations understand the importance of cybersecurity, and they're doing what's right within their organizations to make sure that the best practices are pulled into their organization and met. So those are being brought in. I know that from a supplier standpoint as well, we require as part of our statement of work that they have to be compliant to the 21434, even though it's in a draft state. There's enough of it out there for them to be compliant, and we ask them to, make sure that they're doing threat analysis and risk assessments of their products, and we should be sharing vulnerabilities as each of us, the OEM and the customer, learn of incidents. Sharing all those practices are listed out within our statements of work with our suppliers as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned threat analysis and risk assessment. That's a big part of the threat analysis and risk assessment, or TARA, in 21434. Anybody want to jump in and describe those methods for effective risk assessment? What's going on there in 21434?
I can,
Take that
can
one. Yeah, I mean, Tara is something that's a big part of my life. Threat analysis risk assessment is really the cornerstone of 21434. And it is this set of modules, the set of tools that are presented in a way that can be used throughout a product's life cycle and across an organization for all of their products. Product is probably the first point to bring up with the TARA. The 21434 risk assessment is an assessment of risk to the road user regarding a product. It's not enterprise risk assessment. It's not program risk assessment. It's not investment risk assessment. Those are all very different subjects that are well documented in other spaces. And so what we did with 21434 is to say that an assessor needs to analyze the threat that contributes to a product. And that analysis is in the form of analysis of its assets, analysis of impacts of the loss of cybersecurity of those assets, and analysis of attack paths that can reach those or cause those impacts, and the feasibility of those attack paths. Fundamentally, risk is impact versus likelihood. In 21434, we twisted that word a little bit to say attack feasibility. In cybersecurity and product cybersecurity, you don't want to wait and see what the actual likelihood is so you can take statistical measure of how many people got hacked. That is not the outcome that we encourage. Instead, we rate attack feasibility based on a somewhat subjective analysis of what is the real feasibility of these attack paths actually being able to accomplish the proposed impact categories that are presented in the standard. All of this is very complex, and I understand that you're not going to get this in the 30 seconds that I'm speaking here. And it is for that the SAE put together a comprehensive tutorial and training of 21434 that is accessible through the SAE.
So how will this evolve? We all know that the threat vectors that we're seeing today with regard to cybersecurity have evolved from even those that were prevalent 2, 3, 4 years ago. How does this standard anticipate that kind of dynamic change?
So this standard, honestly, it encourages you to remember the other dimension of risk, and that is impact. We're going to just drive ourselves crazy if we think we're going to be able to understand the full product life of an automobile and all of the weird ways that people might think of how to attack it over the next 2 decades. But yet our products that we build today are very likely to exist for 2 decades. So I like to say, I'm not crazy, so I cannot predict the minds of a crazy person. So instead, I focus strongly on the asset dimension, the impact. What are the fundamental assets, the mission critical assets of the product? This was taught to me very much through the perspective of risk assessment that is driven by NIST and by the government for more military and more government driven risk assessment. Not to say how we are going to be attacked, but to say how we must protect what is critical. Now, on that area of attack, there is a very good effort being piloted, being pushed by the Auto ISAC. And maybe, Matt, maybe you can speak a bit to the attack method. I forget its name now. We aren't using the MITRE name, right?
Right, thanks, Bill. Yes, and what Bill's mentioning is MITRE's a little bit sensitive in a good way for us to kind of co-opt the name. I think it's, we call it the Auto ISAC Attack Framework inspired by MITRE. It's something that doesn't roll off the tongue, but what Bill is referring to, it's an industry collaborative effort to come up with a framework. You can call it an adversarial attack framework, but if you're familiar with the MITRE Enterprise or Mobile framework, it's the similar the binning of tactics and techniques that have been demonstrated either in actual exploits that people are familiar with that have hit the news, or in research that can be validated and vetted, and alternatively that companies potentially could use the results of their penetration tests because they have seen it with their own eyes, and their own pen testers or their third parties have documented with proof that there are some attack methods. So what does this framework do for us? Well, it gives us a consistent way, one, to represent attack paths, which is required by 21434, and then is similarly, by extension, required by WP29, which refers to the section of risk assessment of 21434 as part of this cybersecurity management system certification. So, a long story longer, we think that this attack framework is simple enough, it's consistent, it's repeatable, and it's a framework that has existed for many years and is respected in the industry, and is something that can grow over time as industry partners continue to document known instances of attacks. And by extension, there are many lessons learned in other ways that the framework can be used. For example, really kind of predicting and looking at like a heat map, like what are the commonalities of the known attacks, and then should we then identify goals and compensating controls based on that. So that's just kind of one example of industry trying to get ahead of UNECE type approval, and also the to kind of further put into practice 21434 recommendations.
Well, Matt, you had made an interesting word there in collaboration, and I see as you're all talking about the evolution and incorporation of these new vectors. So how is that collaboration going to work? We've got the Auto ISAC, but are there informal channels as well? I mean, we have Geneva, which is an organization that works on this whole collaborative issue and collaborative standards. How is that playing out in the field? Anuja?
All of these organizations are complementary to each other. None of them seem to be, in any competition. I think the more broader we have these different organizations, and all of them are actually sending the same message out, it's going to be helpful. I think a lot of, we find that several organizations, sometimes entities are part of one organization versus another. They've already contributed resources to one effort versus another. So just lining up, just understanding where the gaps are and tackling that. For example, I know at Geneva, there is a focus on infotainment, but there's also a focus on supporting and building tools and the things that are required for companies in order to achieve some of these compliances. And so I think that goes a long way, because again, we're building an ecosystem. And so, if every organization can find their way and also work together to maximize resources that have already been contributed to their organizations, I think it would be phenomenal. I think everything would just come together so nicely. Same thing with Auto ISAC. I mean, they have a different mandate. They have a different subscription, and there are government entities also that participate. So I think you have a different, set of ears that are listening, and I think it's to our advantage.
Right. It's all. And Lisa, do you have a perspective on that as well?
With regard to sharing and stuff like that, I mean, like you said, there's Autos ISAC, there's other organizations that you can get involved with. I think that through these standards organizations, they're going to continue talking about cybersecurity. So there's lots of opportunities there to be sharing what you've learned, or new practices, or new policies, or whatever that should be put in place. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration, certainly. One thing I'd like to say with regard to the risk assessments and making sure that you keep up with the times, the threat analysis and risk assessment methodology and the incident response process and all those processes that you put in place, your risk methodologies, help you keep up with the threats. It's not something at a point in time where it's only good now. It's always looking at new threats and new landscapes. And you're always supposed to be, as a lessons learned, whatever you've learned from like out in the field, the threat monitoring in the field, bringing it back into your threat models that you perform on your everyday products that are out there today and have been out there in the past. So you go back and look at, gee, does that part have a threat, a risk to that threat now that we didn't take into account the first time around. So it allows continual lessons learned and capability.
Right, and that's an important thing, because I mean, cybersecurity knows no particular. Well, I mean, there are some that hit one company specifically as opposed to the other, but it really affects the whole industry. And this is where collaboration and consensus is critical. Have you all seen that willingness to collaborate move forward more openly than in the old days, when there were very distinct silos among the OEMs and suppliers and so forth, and not wanting to share things? Do you see this consensus moving forward?
Absolutely. Certainly there has been tremendous progression in that space since the beginning. A lot of discussions, a lot of sharing. I think that everyone realizes that this really isn't it is a sharing space. That we aren't what do I want to say, competitive. It isn't a competitive space. It is something that we all, what affects, that one thing that Auto ISAC, what affects one affects all. It isn't a competitive advantage one way or another. We all have to be doing it. So it is a space where sharing is the most pertinent and is happening out there. So it certainly is happening already.
I think the next venue for collaboration that as an industry we need to tackle is that with our regulators. The UNECE and the activity going on in Massachusetts, these are all things that I think would come out much more favorable if the organizations, the entities involved, could view the auto industry and acknowledge this collaborative effort that we have put together and be able to incorporate their needs into this collaboration, rather than watch the UN write a dictate in a standard and have us try to then figure out what to do with it and interpret it. Would be far better if we were all working together.
Yeah, Bill, that you bring an important point, and you mentioned Massachusetts with this right to repair issue and the ballot proposal that's up there. It's sort of, legislators get a little bee in their bonnet and haven't really talked to the folks that are going to be.
It's even worse, because the legislatures even told this group that this was a bad idea, and they went around the legislation and put it on a ballot. And this is a great example of really getting out of sync with where the industry is headed, because I mean, the industry there has to be a security around access to vehicle data. It can't just be left open for anyone to take.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left here, I think, and it would be important that everybody has an opportunity to kind of state their most important point with regard to these standards and the cybersecurity standards and 21434. If you have a statement that you want to make here, we'll go back.
I would just say, just make sure that you're aware of it. It's out there already as a draft, and the final release is coming mid-January, or sorry, mid next year. So look for it.
We joked and said, yeah, it's great reading material, but seriously, it's good reading material. Go to sae.org, download it.
And I will just add that, it is an easy read because we've read it 55 times, I can say that. But he has put out a lot of resources. We are working towards, taking the word forward. There are forums, there are tutorials, there are training programs. It's very easy to find. If you can't find it, please reach out to any of us. We can help you and orient you in the direction to get you more help. So feel free to reach out.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think the underlying message I want to leave everyone with is don't wait. Even though these standards aren't finalized, it is in sufficient shape right now, more than sufficient to start acting. And I know everybody on this panel has already, through their respective companies, have already started well down the path of compliance and implementation. So please don't hesitate, dig in.
Right, and again, I would point out that, and I think we have a question getting presented here in a minute, but I want to point out again that the Geneva will have posted soon its sort of evaluation on 21434, and that would be a useful tool for those that want more information. Waiting for that question, which I don't see in the chat.
I can do it. The question comes from Mike in the audience. What, as the ISO committee members, what would you like to see an organization like Geneva do to support the efforts of ISO 21434?
I would say just awareness. The more awareness, the better. The industry is, you know, the kind of the filter, I'll say a filter bubble, the filter bubbles that we are all in on the panel, we are all mutually reinforced, and because when we talk to each other, we're all similarly aligned and moving forward. But there's a broader array of stakeholders that we may not be aware of, and we're dependent on organizations like Geneva to ensure that the word continues to get out, just in case, because we're kind of heads down implementing, and everybody, the more stakeholders that are aware of 21434 and WP29, just the less friction we're going to have with compliance overall, and the better health of the industry.
That's a great summary statement, Matt. I really appreciate that, and the great contributions of all of you today. Matt, Lisa, Bill, and Anuja, thank you very much on behalf of the Geneva Alliance. We appreciate your participation and patience, and look forward to another opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks all.